This is The Listening Tube.
Well, hello there. Thank you for putting your ear to The Listening Tube. I'm your host, Bob Woodley. On this episode, I'll have a chat with Dr. Kurt Ellenberger about the complexities of music and why our brains understand it in a way that even I could understand. But first,
Not the headlines.
well, the Epstien files are going to be, will be released. And while that is a headline, what isn't a headline is what comes next. I'm not big on hypotheticals, but an objective observer would have already determined that releasing the files will inevitably lead to more questions than they will answer. Some will get exposed. Others will be partly exonerated. A few will be partly implicated. There will be people who will be held to account, as there already have. There will be people who will slip through the cracks of the international judicial system. Whatever shock waves that may result in the disclosure of evidence will be short-lived in the grand scheme of the 24-hour news cycle. But what nobody's yet pointed out is that there will still be those who are not satisfied. Maybe too many documents are redacted. Some documents may lead to fishing expeditions to follow a path that heretofore hadn't been considered. Yes, I use the word heretofore because it worked there. What if there isn't the treasure trove of evidence some people expect? As I pointed out on the listening tube before, accurate record keeping is what brought down Al Capone and what allowed the Allies to find out who was responsible for the atrocities of the Nazis. Maybe Epstein was too smart to keep a consolidated list. The very list everybody hopes is in the files probably doesn't exist. What the legacy media is working on now is how to keep the Epstein story alive regardless of what the records reveal. And there's nothing wrong with that. But opening the vault of the Epstein files might just be today's version of all the drama leading up to the opening of Al Capone's safe. Years after he was gone, there wasn't anything in there.
Similar, but different.
An interesting thing happened on the way to Democrats' efforts to save democracy. Not that it needs saving, but that's something they often claim to be doing. A United States congressman from Illinois, Chuy Garcia, suddenly announced his retirement from office. Nobody saw it coming, as he's holding an office in a highly Democratic district and could have stayed there for the foreseeable future. Oh, wait. There was one person who saw it coming. That was the congressman's chief of staff. Coincidentally, his chief of staff filed petitions to run for the seat on the day before the announcement, which was also the last day for anyone to file such petitions, until 5 p.m.
And if that wasn't enough,
The retiring congressman's chief of staff was the only person to file a petition to run for the office before the deadline. I wonder who will win. The only person on the ballot will be the chief of staff of the retiring congressman. Of course, the congressman has a logical explanation for the sudden announcement of his departure, and the timing can be justified. But if he had waited another day, the Democrats' claim to be saving democracy would not have taken such a stab to the jugular. In the same way that Kamala Harris was anointed to the post of presidential candidate, the congressman essentially appointed his chief of staff to the soon-to-be vacated office. That's not saving, nor even acknowledging democracy. That's mocking democracy. There are some who would proclaim that we have to resort to such measures to save us from Trumpism. No, That's not democracy. Efforts to circumvent democracy in the name of protecting it seems to be the modus operandi of the Democratic Party. Luckily, there's one voice cutting through. As Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman carries the water for common sense, Washington Representative Marie Glesenkamp Perez seems to be able to differentiate between right and wrong. That's why she called out the Illinois congressman for his underhanded maneuvering to essentially appoint his successor. A successor, I might add, to a seat in a very Democratic-heavy district. So the retiring congressman didn't want just any Democrat to win the seat, but only his Democrat. That, in and of itself, is demonstrative of the widening gap within the Democratic Party. But the representative from Washington called for a vote to condemn Garcia for the timing of his retirement announcement, accusing him of, quote, undermining the process of a free and fair election, unquote, according to CNN, adding, in using special procedural powers, known as privilege, her resolution is likely to get a vote. Representative Perez is also quoted as saying, we're loyal to the soil. We're loyal to our constituents and say, like, election subversion is always wrong. That's not how we run. I like the phrase, loyal to the soil. It seems like for the last 5 years we couldn't find a Democrat in Washington who felt that way. Open borders, lawlessness. I'm glad Marie feels that way, and I appreciate her loyalty to our American way of life in this particular instance. There is and will be a political price to pay for her willingness to call out one of our own, especially in a deep blue state like Washington. What I don't know is why no Republicans brought attention to it first. Representative Perez could have saved herself some grief by waiting, but she didn't. Kudos to her. As for the state of Illinois and the people of Representative Garcia's district, well, you just got hoodwinked and denied the privilege of electing your own representative by a member of the party that claims they're trying to save democracy.
Let's go back through the listening tube for This Week in History.
This week in 1950, the storm of the century. A violent snowstorm takes shape on its way to paralyzing the northeastern United States and the Appalachians the next day, bringing winds of up to 100 miles an hour and sub-zero temperatures. Pickens, West Virginia, records 57 inches of snow. The storm would kill 353 people. Climate change, said no one. But an early weakening of the polar vortex over the next couple of weeks could spell colder than average temperatures for some higher or more southern latitudes in the northern hemisphere. I hope it doesn't snow. I don't like snow. It can rain all at once. I don't have to shovel rain.
The listening tube will return at the speed of sound. Send email to thelisteningtube@outlook.com.
My guest this week is a doctor of music. Kurt Ellenberger spent some time in the listening tube from his home in Michigan. Our conversation just might change your tune on how you listen. I know you're a very serious musician, and I enjoyed listening to some of your work while I thought of questions I'd like to ask.
Thanks. Sure.
And now I'm not a musician. I played the tuba in high school. Please forgive me if some of my questions may sound elementary to you.
Yeah, well, that's the audience I'm looking for. Really, is non-professionals who are interested in how this stuff works. And I try to, in all of my articles, I try to kind of bring that to an interested layman. And so that's exactly who I really like to talk to.
All right, perfect. Now, I was particularly interested in speaking with you because of the way you connect music with mathematics. Now,
Hmm.
every song has a time signature which involves counting, but that's not what you're talking about, is it?
No, it goes a lot deeper than that. Basically, just a little bit about how the sound waves or how sound works is that when you hear a sound, when you hear a string, you're hearing that pitch, but that pitch is a combination of hundreds, if not thousands, of other pitches. And the extent to which those other pitches are present in that note, that's where that pitch gets its color from. So we call those harmonics or partials. There's the primary pitch, and then there's all these other pitches that stack up above it that are part of it. It's just a naturally occurring acoustic phenomenon. And those are stacked in a very interesting mathematical way. So if you take a C, you just play a C, and I'll play it, and you play another C above it, we call that an octave. But in that harmonic series, that C above the C is part of the lower C. And in fact, it occurs at a mathematical ratio of 1 to 2 in terms of their string length. So if the first C is 100 centimeters, a string is 10 centimeters long, the C above it is 5 centimeters long. The C above that is 2.5 centimeters. So it keeps having as you go up. So there's something peculiar about that because we call those notes C, but they're completely different pitches. So why do we call them the same note, right? And I think you can hear it. They sound like a higher version of each other, right? The higher one.
Yes.
But that's a really weird human perception of it. We hear two pitches that are completely different frequencies, but we hear them as being a lower and a higher version of the same pitch. So that's odd. We call that an octave because we recognize that there's something there that relates those two pitches. And what relates those two pitches is the math, that we actually hear that the string length is being cut in half. So their waveforms are very symmetrical. And we hear that symmetry as being extreme consonants. That's kind of the math behind it. So the C's are at 2 in the harmonic series, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and that just keeps on going. So I'm sure you'll recognize when we used to buy computer memory that it was 16 megabytes or 32 or 64. So what we've got in music there is the binary series, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, right? Each a higher factor of 2. And so that's the math behind it. It sits at the core of the computers that you and I are using for this conversation. It sits at the base of music. It's what defines consonants in music. And it also is at the core of when we started our lives. When a sperm meets an egg, it's a cell. That divides and there are 2. That divides, then there are 4. Those divide, then there are 8. It's really that binary series is something that's really rooted deeply in our lives, and we're not really even aware of it.
Well, certainly, I don't think anybody who casually listens to music is aware that there's math associated with it. So, how does that affect the way we interpret music?
Well, so here's so that's the start of it. Now here's the astonishing thing. When something asymmetrical comes in, so if we're taking string lengths of 2, 4, 8, 16, they map out very symmetrically. If we put an 11 in there, it doesn't, right? It sort of breaks up the symmetry. So your ear is hearing an 11, and what your brain does then is say, I don't like 11. It's a complicated waveform. It's clashing with the 2 or the 4 underneath it, right? So what your ear does is it supplies you with the solution to that the closest, usually lower factor of 2 is what your brain supplies as the solution to the mathematical problem. So that's why at the end of a tune, when you get to that final chord, it's kind of a sense of relief because you've had complex waveforms and then all of a sudden, you're wanting to hear the 10 or the 8, and then the composer gives it to it, gives it to you, and then you're satisfied by it. You feel like it's arrived where it should arrive. So that's really the engine at the heart of music that makes it possible for music to tell a story and have a narrative, because you are listening to these complex waveforms. You're expecting, you're providing a solution for it. If the piece goes where you want it to, you're satisfied. If it doesn't, now you're on a journey that, oh, okay, I was expecting the 8 from the 9, but it didn't go there. They're stretching out that tension over a long period of time, and that's the engine of what makes music tick.
You say that part of the way we interpret music, or how we understand it, is different or contradictory to Darwin's theory of evolution. How so?
Well, I've been teaching this in my classes for many years, and I started to ask a friend of mine, who's an evolutionary biologist, why do we have this? Like, what's the evolutionary advantage that we would get from being able to fill in a 10 from an 11? I was really confused about that. He kind of steered me in the right direction, said, read this, read this, read this. I spent about a year and a half looking at the literature on this, and I just didn't find any viable solution or explanation for it that would give. So if you can hear this, if your brain fills in a 10 from an 11, how does that make more procreation possible? How does that make survival more possible? I couldn't find an answer that I thought was sufficient, and so it just really left me in a quandary. Like, what is this? Why do we have this?
Did you find an answer?
Not really.
No?
I think the only what I found was that with evolutionists, there's always an answer. I talked to Edward Dutton. I don't know if you know him. He's a British podcaster, and he's an evolutionary psychologist. And I presented some of the explanations, and it seems like when you hit that wall, there's always one more explanation that evolution can give. So his explanation was, well, if we can hear animals, and we hear a rough sound, and then we want it to stop, that might have given us an advantage. And I really didn't find that to be a compelling answer. I honestly, to me, the thing that it points to is that there's a creator, that music was a gift to us. I don't see any other reason for it.
So no actual benefit to our survival, but certainly benefits to us as far as making our lives more enjoyable.
Yes. I mean, as Nietzsche said, life without music would be a mistake. And I think that's when I started thinking, geez, without this amazing art form, what would life be like? Would we have movies? Would we have theater? What kind of art would we have? We would only have literature, I guess, because without that ability to hear the complex and supply the solution, we don't have musical narrative. We just have sound. And I don't think it would grip us that way.
Math is an absolute, 2 + 2 = 4.
Mm-hmm.
But people's taste in music seems to evolve. Now, is that true? Or does our taste in music have deeper roots from which we really don't stray very far?
Wow, that's a deep question. That's one I've thought about a lot, because you can see, the music you listened to when you were young, like let's say, what were you listening to when you were 15, for example?
Oh, probably Pink Floyd.
Okay, do you still listen to Pink Floyd?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So some of those tastes stay with us throughout our whole lives, but I'm sure you've added a lot of other styles of music, or a lot of other artists since then, right?
I have, but many of them seem to fall within certain types of genre.
Mm-hmm.
Rock and roll, jazz, big band, classical, and I don't know if those types of music are related in any way or not, or why I seem to be attracted to those.
Well, I'll give you my opinion on this, because you have to sort of wonder, what is it about certain composers and certain bands that drive you to them, or that pull you to them? and others that don't. So even when you think about your friend group, I remember I remember hearing the band UK. You know that group?
I am familiar with UK.
And I heard it on a Sunday night. They had in Detroit radio, they had this Sunday night, they played a new album start to finish. And they started it at 11 and I couldn't go to sleep. I was listening to it. I just loved it so much. I bought it, then I brought it to my friends and most of them hated it. And so that's happened many times where I love this artist and I love this music and I bring it to close friends and they say, nope, I don't like it. So I've been thinking about why that is. And I think what it is that in music, the composer embeds it with their worldview, their philosophy, how they see life, how they live life, their personality, if you will. And I think when we hear music that we like, it's partly because we're kind of vibrating with that composer's worldview and that psychology and that philosophy. That's the only explanation I can come up with, although it's not a very scientific one, but it is one that the composer Paul Hindemith talked about, saying that there's more embedded there than just the sound. You're embedding your personality, your psychology, your worldview in the music, and when we hear someone who is closer to ours, then we like it. When it's someone that's further from ours, we don't really go with it.
Is the definition of music changing with evolving genres?
Well, I think there was kind of an attempt to do that in the mid 1900s with composers like John Cage, for example, who just challenged the very notion of what music is by doing kind of stunt filled or stunts with music, like writing a piece for 6 radios and 6 people walk into a room with each has a radio tuned to a different station and then it plays for however long it plays and that's his music. He did all kinds of that kind of stuff challenging what that notion is, but I really don't see that as having been successful. It's an interesting thought experiment, but I don't think anyone ever goes home and says, honey, let's cook dinner tonight. I'll make some pasta. Why don't you turn on the John Cage as some background music? That doesn't happen. So it's kind of an interesting thought experiment or philosophical query as to what it is. But I think it comes down still to music is organized sound that is generally using that harmonic series and the math in order to create key areas and to make sound narratives.
There's always seems to be a generational gap between, among people who like music, and like an old curmudgeon like myself might say, well, that's not real music or what. Now, was there ever a time when somebody said, that can't be music, it doesn't have any violins in it?
Oh, of course. I mean, you mentioned jazz. Boy, the changeover from Dixieland to big band, when the Dixieland stuff kind of petered out and then it went to big band and then the bebop stuff started in the 40s. Wow, the Dixieland people said these bebop people are crazy. They're just playing wrong notes. And the bebop players they called the Dixieland people the moldy figs. Your stuff doesn't work anymore. So I think that's been going on forever. Or even if you think in the 70s, the disco craze, and then how the rockers just rebelled against that. Disco sucks, and there was that big disco burning fiasco at the baseball game in Chicago. So
Yep.
I think this is constantly going on. That the new style's coming in, and the old style kind of resists it. What's strange, though, I was just talking about this in my class yesterday, was I've noticed that students, so the 19 to 22, 23-year-olds that are in college, they all listen to classic rock, 60s, 70s, 80s, some of the 90s stuff. So they're listening to their own music as well, contemporary stuff, but they're really steeped in that era. So maybe like 65 through 95, they just know all of those bands, which is strange because most of those bands were active when their grandparents were listening to it as teenagers. So I don't remember when I was 18 or 19, I don't remember listening to music from the 1910s or 20s. right? I was listening to the current music. So I think there is something kind of strange going on in society where generation after generation, in terms of popular music, are really grafting onto that kind of classic rock 80s and into the 90s era.
And you really haven't thought of an explanation for that.
Um, I think it's because it was good music. I
Sure.
think the music, everything that's come after that, is kind of rooted in that. So you're getting versions of that music updated, which is cool, but it's not original in the sense that that stuff was. So I think it's just that high quality music where the bands were competing for record deals and not everyone could just put their music out there easily. So there was a real gatekeeper process getting those bands to the very top, and I think that's probably part of it too.
I would have to agree, and even to the degree where certain record labels seem to put out better music than other record labels because they
Hmm.
had different objectives, certainly, and wanted to reach a particular audience, for example. Now, music, as I'm sure you know, is a very emotional thing for a lot of people.
Hmm.
It provokes emotions.
Hmm.
Music can make us laugh and cry and feel good and feel sad and recall memories.
Yep.
But you mentioned that minor chords spark a different emotion than major chords. Why is that?
Well, that's another question that I got from students over the years, and I had kind of my explanation for it, but I hadn't researched it. So I spent quite a bit of time researching what acousticians and physics people over the years had said about it. And again, there wasn't a real strong, this is what it is. But it seemed clear to me that what's happening with the minor chord is that in the harmonic series, so if I play a C, then the partials in that are as follows. It goes C, that's the main note that I'm playing. The next ingredient is a C an octave up from that. Then the next ingredient is the G an octave up from that. And then the next ingredient is a C up from there. The fifth partial is the major third. So it's very prominent in the harmonic series because it's so low in the series. So when you play a C, the E is sounding, the E natural is sounding. So the major third is sounding when you play a C on a bass or on a piano. So it's there. What you're doing with the minor third is you're putting a half step below that pitch in the chord. But the E is the major third is still there. So what happens in a minor chord is there's a half step dissonance between the minor third and the ghosty major third. So the major third is kind of existing in the ether. No one's playing it, but it's in the makeup of the pitch that you're playing. So what you have there is a half step dissonance. And a half step dissonance is like a length waveform of 19 or a string length of 19 over, let's say, 2 or 8. So you have a very strong complex dissonance there in a half step. And I think that's what we're hearing. We're hearing a dissonance that we accept, but it never gets resolved. So it makes us feel anxious, maybe frustrated, sad, melancholy, because we want that minor third to go up to the major third, but the major third is only there as a doppelganger. It's way in the back, sort of it's been usurped by the minor third, but that dissonance is still there. And what they call that, they said there's a roughness in the minor third. And the roughness comes from the rumble of the minor third against the major third, which is a half step apart.
And that has an emotional impact on us.
Yes, because it's an unresolved dissonance. And we want to resolve the dissonances, right? It's like, think of like a hymn, like a church hymn. At the end, it's the Amen, right? So it's
Amen. Yep.
right. Right? So that ah is an 11 and it resolves to a 10. That's satisfying. If we just leave it sitting on the 11, we're like, hey, this tune isn't done yet. Come on. And then when it goes down to the 10, then you say, okay, now we have symmetry again. So it's the same with the minor third, except it doesn't resolve. So it's sitting there, it's a dissonance, and it never gets fixed. We never get to the, in this case, 19 down to 18 or 19 down to 8 or whatever it is.
And this all has to do with the math and how our brains interpret the sounds.
Yes. So your brain recognizes the symmetry when those string lengths are in a simple ratio. So think of it this way. If I asked you to take a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and fold it in half, could you do it?
Sure.
Could you fold it in quarters?
Sure.
Eighths?
It'll get more difficult as it gets smaller.
Yeah. How about if I asked you to fold it in 11?
No, probably not.
Right. So, that's a visual analogy of how we can easily deal with twos and multiples of two. But as soon as we get into the complex relationships, we're done. That's when we bring pen and paper in, and then you'd have to measure the page to see where to fold it to get 11 out of it, right? It's the same way in music. We want those 2s, 4s, 8s, 16s. Those are symmetrical. As soon as you throw something that's asymmetrical in there, we go, that's asymmetrical. So that's why when someone cuts you off on the freeway, your car horn goes. It doesn't go, please don't cut me off. It doesn't do that. What you're doing when you hit the car horn is you're sending a bunch of complex asymmetrical waveforms to that driver, and that is annoying because there's no solution to it. So that's why that works.
I like it. Do tempo and dynamics contribute to how we calculate music?
Absolutely. So tempo is kind of mimetic. So you look at most pop music, right? It's right around 120 beats per minute, maybe 126, something like that, which is about double the human heart rate or close or around there. So when your body hears those beats at that speed, your body acts and mimics those. So those rhythmic gestures are then mimicked by the body, and you get more pumped up. That's why you put that kind of music on when you're running or lifting weights or exercising, whatever.
Or when you want to dance.
Or when you want to dance, exactly. But when you walk into a funeral and there's very slow, sad music, the rhythm there is telling you, slow down, move slowly. This is not a place to be exuberant. So you start to mimic the gestures, the rhythmic gestures in the slower music, which are more appropriate for an occasion like that. So absolutely, it's linked, and it's really the human body and mind will start to mimic those gestures. And if those gestures are lively and vigorous, then you become lively and vigorous while you're listening to it. If they're subdued and melancholy, then you will start to mimic that as well. And so that's why the different events have different types of music, because we start to act like the music.
So music can not only make us react in an emotional way, but also a physical way.
Yes, absolutely.
Are we mostly aware of it or not?
I don't think we're aware of it. We're aware that something's happening. Like people will say, well, what kind of music do you listen to when you're at the gym? Oh, well, I listen to EDM, really fast pounding EDM. Well, why do you do that? Well, it just pumps me up. Oh, okay. They don't then think, well, why does it pump me up? I think that's where it stops for most people, is they know that it has a utility, but they're not really looking into why it has that utility. So I always joke, if you ask people what they use music for, they'll say, well, it pumps me up, makes me feel good. I also use it when I'm sad. I like to listen to, certain music will pick me up. Other music will kind of calm me down. So I always think we're lucky that music wasn't invented today, because the government would regulate it, because it functions just like a drug, right? It goes in your ears, and your mental state changes. Just like if you slam a shot in a beer, you're going to feel it. Music does the same thing. It elevates and it can depress as well. So it works very much like a psychoactive drug. So like I said, I'm glad it's here today. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it.
I think you just brought up a great idea for a fictional novel, actually. If music were invented today and if it was government regulated, wow, certainly it would be a different world we live in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, regimes and governments are aware of this, right? The Russians didn't like jazz. The Nazis didn't like jazz either. They tried to suppress that because they sensed in that music was something. It was the sound of freedom.
Is there a mathematical connection to music that can explain why my wife wants to go see 3 Days Grace in concert for the third time?
I'm afraid that's a question I can't answer.
Okay. I just thought I'd throw it out there. Now, I have a Roland 730 synthesizer keyboard here in my studio.
Yeah.
I don't know how to play it. I know how to play with it.
Okay.
And I've used it to create many, not all, but many of the sounds that you hear on my program, The Listening Tube.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about being able to create sounds other than our own voices that we find so appealing?
Wow. I think it's just another way of expressing ourselves without using words. And I think that goes really deep. I think that actually reaches a deeper part of who you are than when you're using words. So I think that's really what it is, that the ability to express ourselves without using words and trying to find that expression in sound. I think that's what it boils down to. And that's infinitely fun to do too.
Oh, absolutely. I could mess around for hours.
Yep.
Now, one of your articles mentions the concept of seeing sound. What do you mean by that?
What I meant by that is if you take the string lengths of sounding a C, you see a sine wave that's doing this, and when you do a C an octave up from that, you see that there's another sine wave in there that's cutting it in half perfectly. So you're hearing the symmetry, but when we see what the string lengths are doing, you're seeing why that symmetry is there. So it was kind of a play on words. We're not really seeing sound, but what we are seeing and hearing and sensing is the symmetry of that the binary series, the 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. It forms a beautiful pattern when we look at those vibrating string lengths simultaneously.
Okay. The reason I wanted to ask you that is now, almost 6 years ago, I lost the hearing in my right ear, just completely, overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Before I lost that hearing, I could see sound. Not in the sense of, I could see where the two sides of stereo met.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't do that anymore. Not having stereo hearing, my brain had to adjust how I interpreted sound. For a short time after it happened, I had a hard time recognizing songs that I had heard 1,000 times before.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating.
Is there a benefit to being able to hear in stereo when it comes to how our brains interpret music?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why if you look at any mixes of any tunes, right? Every instrument is panned left or right a little bit or a lot. Nothing is just straight center. Why? Because the stereo makes it three-dimensional. It allows us to place the sound, like I said, in 3 dimensions rather than just a flat sound coming at us. So from an evolutionary perspective, you could say, well, that's really helpful because if I'm hearing the steps of a lion and it's coming from this direction, my left ear is going to pinpoint that. My brain can pinpoint exactly where that is. And so that's why they do it in recording, is it gives texture to the sound when things are panned a little bit left and a little bit right. If it was all the same, it just wouldn't have that texture. So that's what you're missing. Yeah.
I know I can't tell where sound comes from anymore. So I have to be very careful when I cross the street. I was just wondering if there's anything I haven't asked you about that you would like to share.
No, this has been really great. We really covered a lot of ground here. It would help with the visuals a little bit. So I would say if people are interested to follow up and to read my article, then you can actually hear some of this that is harder to do in this format.
Thank you so much for being here today. I really do appreciate it. I have enjoyed our conversation. I hope you have as well.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Dr. Ellenberger's website is kurtellenberger.com. That's Kurt with a K, and Ellenberger has all E's and no U's. Kurt has a lot more to offer when it comes to learning about the science and philosophy of music and listening to music. Thank you again to Dr. Kurt Ellenberger for spending some time with me in the Listening Tube. The Listening Tube is written and produced by yours truly. Copyright 2025. Happy Thanksgiving to those of you in the United States. Shout out to some of the new locations tuning in: Phoenix, Arizona, Springfield, Massachusetts, and Peterlee, Durham in the United Kingdom. Thank you for putting your ear to the Listening Tube. Visit thelisteningtube.com to follow the program. I'm your host, Bob Woodley, for Thou Ad Infinitum.